I notice you were studying. What's the subject? Let's take a look. Oh, a fashion history book? That's one of my favorite subjects. You study so hard. Here. Would you like me to read to you? I'm sure you could use a study break. Don't worry. I don't mind. Let's see what we have. Oh. The Italian Renaissance, 1400 to 1600 AD. Alrighty. Why don't you just sit back and relax, and I can read this to you. Is that okay? Alrighty. Let's see. Historical background. At the time of the Renaissance, Italy was not a country, but a geographic area made up of a number of small city-states, each one ruled by a powerful prince. These princes were sometimes members of ancient noble families, sometimes called condottieri, hard military commanders who had taken over the reins of government in the states they were hired to defend, and sometimes members of wealthy merchant families who had achieved political power, as well as financial leadership. Fortunately, for the advancement of art, many rulers commissioned artwork as a way of displaying their wealth. They dressed lavishly in expensive clothing, and the artists who painted or sculpted their portraits depicted these garments in considerable detail. The population of Renaissance Italy was divided among the aristocracy, the merchant class, artisans and artists, the town laborers, and the peasants of the countryside. Some families owned slaves from Mongolia, Turkey, or Russia. Most slaves were women who served as domestic help. Men of aristocratic or noble families made up the ruling class in most Italian city-states. In some areas, however, merchants had gained great power and political control. These men generally sought to become more respectable by marrying into the noble families. In these families, sons inherited the family wealth, even if she had no brothers. A girl received only a small portion of the family holdings, while the bulk of the estate passed to her paternal uncle. Much of the family's wealth had to be invested in equipping a marriageable daughter with a sufficiently large dowry to enable her to marry well. When a family had been blessed with too many daughters, some of them were packed off to convents where no dowry was required. A woman such as Caterina Sforza, born between 1463 to 1509 AD, who ruled and defended the town of Forlì against her husband's assassins and later against other foes, was an exception and existed outside of the general social framework of the Renaissance. Even wealthy merchants were considered to be lower status, and the aristocracy in some towns, though not in Florence and Genoa, where the ruling families had been merchants. Sons were educated to eventually take over their families' businesses, many of which were, in some way, related to the textile industry, such as weaving, dyeing, finishing, or trading cloth. Even bankers had first been traders in cloth. This is very interesting so far. Would you like me to keep reading? How's my voice? I'll keep reading so you can relax. Okay, let's see. Skilled artisans could do well and were more fortunate than unskilled laborers, who often had difficulty managing to feed and clothe themselves and their families. At the very bottom of the social scale were the peasants who had farmed the land. Working on a sharecropping basis with the landowner, not only were they dependent on weather, but their lives were disrupted by the armies that constantly ravaged the countryside, fighting for one city or another. In spite of their economic difficulties, many people from lower levels of society tried to imitate the upper classes in their dress. Sumptuary laws were prolific in countries such as England, France, Spain, and Italy. One Renaissance author summarized the appropriate conduct for gentlemen. Everyone should dress well according to his age and his position in society. If he does not, it will be taken as a mark of contempt for other people. This is cited in the Delicasa, 1968, page 179. Sumptuary laws set forth to regulate the numbers of items of clothing an individual could acquire, as well as the types of materials and ornamentation, while the legislation that's a mistake of mine. Let me reread that for you. While the legislation did not always impact actual clothing practices, they do provide indicators of the power of clothing to convey and impart status. How was that? I learned quite a lot just by reading to you. You said you want to take a break? Okay. I don't mind. Oh, there's so many pages to read. I think you studied very well today. Oh, you need to rest. That's no problem. How about this? I'll read to you one more paragraph as you get cozy. How does that sound? All right, then. One more paragraph. The cloth industries in Renaissance Italy. By the beginning of the Renaissance, Italian textiles were widely used throughout Europe. Raw silk was imported from Asia, Vgen, and Venice to supply the key weaving centers of Bologna, Florence, Genoa, and Venice, as well as Milan and Siena. Gosh, I'm butchering all these Italian names. Maybe I need to study this too. I'll keep going. During the 16th century, silk weaving developed in Florence, Lyons, and Tours, as well as in Germany. Wool and silk were the primary fabrics woven in Italy. Silk, wool, cotton, and linen were used in Italian dress. A description of the organization of the wool trade in the city of Prato around 1400 provides a brief overview of the production system for textiles. Entrepreneurs provided the capital and controlled the production. Washers and carders prepared the fiber for spinning. Those spun the yarn prepared the yarn for the loom, and the weaves were almost all women working at home. Dyers were members of a cloth guild and subject to control by the entrepreneur, while the finishers, who did the fulling, clipping, mending, and folding, had their own workshops and tools and were more independent. Although little documentary evidence exists, most scholars agree that the increase in the complexity of decoration of Italian silk fabrics of the 15th century indicates that improvements in silk wearing looms must have made at about this time. Renaissance painters depicted many of these luxurious fabrics so realistically that one can identify them as satin, cut velvets, plain velvets, or brocades simply by looking at the pictures. These fabrics were especially suited to the almost sculptural lines of Italian Renaissance fashion. Different cities became well known for their luxury goods, and the different guilds and trades clustered together. Many of these fabrics copied Chinese, Indian, or Persian patterns, and the decorative motifs and reflection of the close trading contacts between Italy and Asia. Some Renaissance painters are thought to have designed textiles, others sketched textile designs to incorporate into their paintings. Well, there you have it. A few paragraphs of the Italian Renaissance fashion history. There's much more to cover. Oh, did you fall asleep already? All right then. I'll leave this for you right here when you wake. You did a great job studying today. Until next time.